high school education was at the frontier of the knowledge you need to succeed in society. Today, college is at the frontier of the kind of skills and education you need to succeed in society. And so what we need to do in this country is do a college movement, just like we had a high school movement. And I'm not pretending that'll be easy or that it'll happen overnight, but I think it's absolutely necessary to secure the long-run economic health of this country. And so, independent of what's happening in politics today or tomorrow or next year, I just think that's where we need to get in the long run. We need mass tertiary education, mass college education in this country to help us prepare for the 21st century. My name is David Deming. I'm a professor at the Harvard Kennedy School and the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and I'm the director of the Malcolm Weiner Center for Social Policy at the Harvard Kennedy School. So I think at the heart of the idea of the American dream is progress. In a sense, how should we think about whether we can't have a chance to achieve the American dream? We think about it in relation to where we came from. And I think for a lot of people that is, am I doing better than my parents did? Am I moving forward in my generation? And the thing that's really changed in America over the last generation is many, many fewer people are actually doing better than their parents. For example, for generations born in the 1940s, more than 90% of people did better than their parents. Today, for generations born in the late 70s and early 1980s, it's about a 50-50 shot. And so I think for many people, the idea of forward progress is the American dream, and for many of us, it's more or less a coin flip at this point. And so the question is, how do we get ourselves to the point where more people can achieve the American dream? And I think a generation ago, a lot of that was about graduate from high school, get a good job in your hometown, probably in manufacturing. It's probably a union job, and especially for men. And so there was a way to achieve the American dream, to do better than your parents without getting a college education. And I think for most people today, that dream isn't possible anymore. I think in order to make progress relative to the previous generation, you need to get a college degree, and in many cases, a four-year college degree. And the problem we have in America is that that is not accessible enough to many people, partly because of cost. That is, most families can't afford the full sticker price, certainly of tuition, but even a reduced rate, 4 years at a selective four-year college, certainly and increasingly at public four-year universities. And part of it is about the quality of education. And so is our education system preparing people to do the kind of work that allows them to succeed in college? And so I think it's not really that this is a good or a bad thing. It's that if you look at where jobs are today, what kinds of jobs are paying middle-class wages, it's increasingly knowledge work. It's increasingly jobs that require skills like problem solving, teamwork, and those are things that you learn not only in college, but primarily in college. And so I think the challenge for us is to give our population a set of what are increasingly necessary skills to really allow more people to achieve the dream. I think the question of what education actually does is a tricky one. And I often get a question from people, some version of, well, I majored in psychology in college and I don't use any of that stuff on the job and therefore I didn't learn anything in college. But I think that's really a mistake to look at it that way. And the reason is that education isn't just about the facts you learn and whether you directly use them on the job. It's also teaching you a way of thinking, and it's changing your identity in a fundamental way. And so the question you have to ask yourself is, would I be the same if I had not gone to college and instead I had spent 4 years living at home, working a job that doesn't require a college degree, maybe a minimum wage job, living with my parents or living in an apartment, would I have been the same person as if I had gone to college? And I don't think most people are capable of that kind of introspection, basically going backwards in time and playing out your life if it had turned out differently. And so I think many people have a tendency to not understand the way education helps you because it actually changes the way you view the world. And so I think some kind of concrete examples of what college education does is it teaches you how to think abstractly, how to transfer learning from one kind of abstract domain to another. So thinking about, you might say, well, what does reading great literature have to do with performing well on the job? Well, a lot of what reading great literature is understanding the perspectives of multiple characters and understanding where people are coming from. That's actually a pretty important skill in the workplace where you have to work in teams and understand the perspectives of your team members and say, sometimes I have to be a leader, sometimes I have to be a follower. What are my coworkers' strengths and weaknesses? How can I fit in? And those are things that, it's not like you have sixth period where you teach those things, right? It's not directly teaching facts. It's teaching a way of thinking, a way of analyzing problems, and a way of working with others that is increasingly necessary. And so I think that's what education does at a fundamental level. Certainly at the college level, that's what education does. And so I think that's really important and I think underappreciated as well. It is true, a college education is the best investment a young person can make, but it's a risky investment. Okay? And when I say investment, what I mean is you're going to pay something up front and get some benefits down the road. And those benefits at the time you make the investment are uncertain. And so I don't mean to suggest that it's an investment everybody should be making and everyone who's not doing it is making a mistake, because a lot of people don't have the money to finance a college education. But the sense that the meaning of the best investment is, even though college tuition prices are rising faster than inflation and have been rising faster than inflation for the last 30 years, the value of a college degree on the labor market is so much greater than it used to be that when you compare the lifetime increase in income from having a college degree to not having one, even though tuition prices have risen so fast, it's still a better investment than it used to be. And the other thing is, we know it works. There's thousands of studies documenting the returns to education. And so I think the challenge is, how do we help people finance that education through increased financial aid, more forgiving loan packages, income-based repayment, things like that. And then also improving the quality of the college experience itself so that the benefits are even greater. Now, just because it's a good investment doesn't mean it can't be better. And so I think our challenge is to basically make a serious set of investments in higher education the way we did in this country 100 years ago when we invested in mass secondary school education. That turned out to be a very, very good investment from the U.S.'s perspective, and I think it's time for us to do that again now. The challenge of dealing with technological change is one that in some sense has always been with us, but I think a lot of people have the sense at this time that technologies like artificial intelligence, machine learning, are changing work quickly. And when things are changing more rapidly, that's actually when you want to invest more in what I would think of as basic education, right? So a finding that I had with one of my co-authors, Kadeem Narey, is about the returns over time to science, technology, engineering, and math degrees, or STEM degrees. And one of the things we found was that the economic returns to a STEM degree are about 40%, meaning if you major in STEM versus if you major in some other subject like social sciences or history, you're going to earn 40% more when you graduate on average. However, when you look at those, so that's about age 23. When you look at people who major in STEM versus people who major in some other subject at age 40, the difference is much smaller. It can be as little as 10% and sometimes 0, depending on the exact major. And so what that tells you is not so much that it's bad to major in STEM, because those people are still doing well, but that there's kind of two returns to a degree. One is the specific technical things you learn right now that employers want right now. But those things change, you know. If you look at people who majored in computer science a decade ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, none of them were learning the techniques that are being used in a widespread way today. So that's kind of the proximate return to education, is something that employers want right away. But that fades away because the technology changes, your skills become obsolete, and you have to retool over time. But then there's this other return, which is learning how to think critically, learning how to problem solve, learning how to work in teams. Those are kind of future-proof skills that can transfer pretty flexibly from one job to the next. And that, I think, is the most durable, most important long-run benefit of education, and one that I think is often understated. And so that's kind of the lesson from that study, is that when technology is changing more rapidly, that's actually when you want to invest more in basic skills, because basic skills are future-proof, whereas technical skills have a shelf life. And again, it's not that you want one or the other. You really want both, but you don't want to just think about education as only giving you technical skills. It's also giving you a set of basically learning how to learn, right? So actually helping you cope with technological change. So free college is all the rage these days. It's become something of a political football. It's a way for the Democratic presidential candidates to set themselves against each other. But I think I take a very long-run perspective when thinking about free college, which is 100 years ago in the United States, a bunch of communities all around the country made decisions independently to invest in secondary school education. Right? And the reason was that at the sort of dawn of the American Industrial Revolution, factories needed workers with basic literacy and numeracy skills. And people knew that. They saw that happening all around them, and they decided they wanted to get some of these basic skills so they could work in some of these new jobs. And that kind of spawned this kind of decentralized growth of secondary education in the United States, made this country the first country in the world to have mass secondary education. And as documented by Claudia Golden and Larry Katz in their book, The Race Between Education and Technology, this was really the key to American economic growth in the 20th century. And so I think that was a kind of fortuitous, long investment in basic skills of the population. In a lot of in European countries, for example, they kind of narrowed the pipeline and invested mostly in elite education. And I think what we need to do is take that lesson from 100 years ago and apply it to today, which is, at that time, a high school education was at the frontier of the knowledge you need to succeed in society. Today, college is at the frontier of the kind of skills and education you need to succeed in society. And so what we need to do in this country is do a college movement, just like we had a high school movement. And I'm not pretending that'll be easy or that it'll happen overnight, but I think it's absolutely necessary to secure the long-run economic health of this country. And so, independent of what's happening in politics today or tomorrow or next year, I just think that's where we need to get in the long run. There's a lot of different ways to get there. I've written about some of them, and I'm happy to talk about them more. But I think big picture, to me, that's very clear that we need mass tertiary education, mass college education in this country to help us prepare for the 21st century. I think the key problem we have in this country with college education is that it's very much an elite-driven system. And that's served us well because we have great research universities that produce a lot of the knowledge that's important. So I'm not saying we should get rid of that. But what happens is those schools also happen to have very small subsets of what they do, which is elite undergraduate education. If you think about a school like Harvard University or Princeton or Stanford or MIT, these are schools that have many, many more graduate students than undergraduate students. And they're doing a lot of other things besides undergraduate education, but they're not expanding. Okay, and so the number of people in this country who can actually get a very high quality four-year college education isn't sufficient to meet the demand for it. And because those schools aren't expanding, we need to think about expansion in our great public universities, and even our, at least right now, sort of regional public universities, right? So I'm not talking about just the elite schools, although they can play a role here too. I'm talking about basically doubling the college graduation rate, which is going to have to involve public universities. And so I think our challenge as a country is really much more about mass public four-year education or two-year education than it is about what's happening in the Ivy League.